Hi guys, what is going on? And welcome back to another video on Amazon's New World. So it has been actually a couple of months now since I last checked in on New World, and I really thought it was about time we dived in and did a little bit of an update to have a look what's changing, because boy, things are changing quickly. With a pretty large amount of big changes happening in the last month's update, it really feels like the dev team have kind of gotten into their stride now, and they're really starting to pump out these updates with new additions a lot quicker, because we've had things like the Eastern themed Ebonscale Reach as a new region introduced into the game. We've also had 2 new expeditions, the Amrine Excavation and the Garden of Genesis. Alongside, we've had some of the first new PvP content in the form of the Outpost Rush mode, and really an absolute wholesale rework of every weapon, its skill tree, and like 15 pages of patch notes. And I think when you consider where the game was back at the preview event in August last year, it feels like New World has really come along a tremendously long way. You know, one of the main criticisms of the game at that time was really the lack of content, particularly in the end game, because, you know, don't forget the game had only recently transitioned from a survival MMO into its current sort of theme park MMO form the previous year. And actually, it is quite a radically different type of game, which required a pretty serious amount of reworking from where New World had been developed up to at that point. There was also quite a lot of upset from the more sort of hardcore PvP side of the community, because they really weren't happy with the direction of the change. However, with the more recent additions, we are really starting to see some pretty huge improvements. The guys over at Amazon seem to have really taken to heart the issues around the lack of endgame content, and have really since started to introduce a plethora of new features. For example, as we mentioned at the start, the new Eastern themed Ebonscale Reach zone is intended for players over level 51, it's end game content. Or the new Garden of Genesis expedition is for max level 60 players, again more end game content. Of course, there are still people disappointed with the direction of the MMO, but I've started to hear even some of the more previously sceptical players starting to be won over. And these aren't theoretical features or hype building, these are things that have actually been developed and are actually currently in the current alpha build. One of the other big updates we've recently had was the addition of English voiceover work for NPCs. This was something that was, actually really lacking in the preview event in August. Without the chatter and, just having to read these large paragraphs of like quest line text whenever you're talking to an NPC kind of meant the game lost a little bit of its immersion for me. So this certainly seems to be a really good addition to add back into the game, as long as I don't go and do an Oblivion and only use 2 voice actors for the entire game. Unless one of them is Sean Bean, of course, in which case, go right ahead. The same is also true for the questing system in New World. If you, like me, spent any real amount of time playing in the preview event, then you'll have soon realised that the vast majority of not only the main story quest, but also the side quests, will either be kill X or go and collect X, and this rapidly becomes pretty much a chore. So I'm glad they have realised that this isn't great and decided to put more effort into updating and improving the quest system, to not only give it more of a narrative flow, but to actually add a lot more variety with the introduction of new objectives and quest-specific tasks that should help really to mix things up a bit and to provide a bit more variety into the quest line. So maybe now we won't have to do quests just opening hundreds upon hundreds of chests. It seems like they're mostly going to be initially focusing this on the starting quests, but they have stated they intend to continue for this to follow through to provide sort of a consistent story-driven quest line up to level 60. And finally, just while we're talking about quests, they have introduced weapon and armour quests as well, starting at level 40, which is going to give you sort of a quest-based gear line right up to level 60. Another aspect that got quite a lot of criticism during the preview event was combat, and this is something that New World has really continued to work on updating and improving. The combat experience has had multiple updates, and the last March update saw the 3rd edition of the combat tweaks based on alpha player feedback and data. An example of this would be the attribute rework, which puts a much greater emphasis on speccing your attribute points for a specific class by moving damage away from the weapons and into these attribute points. Furthermore, armour has been updated, so that physical and elemental protection are going to be the same for each armour weight, i.e. heavy armour now has the highest physical and elemental protection, but it also has the highest level of weight encumberment, which means that you are going to be losing out on things like the 10 to 20% extra damage that's going to be conveyed by medium and light armour sets. Finally, for the combat updates, they have since reworked every single weapon skill tree, from great axe to musket, to give a much clearer bonuses from each of the tech trees. So each weapon is going to have sort of 2 tech trees which you can go down, as well as upping the weapon mastery points from 32 to 38 to allow players more choice in speccing out these trees. This is honestly something that was really needed to happen, as some weapon skills trees have really needed updating since the preview event, so I'm glad they've kindly put the time aside to make the effort to make this change, because I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. But it is not all PvE stuff. They have got their first iteration of Outpost Rush released in this patch. It's a 20v20 player team battle event in which players fight, over these ancient technologies and hidden sources of Azoth. You'll have to fight for control of strongholds and strategic resource locations. And the game really needed more PvP events, particularly after some of the changes that we mentioned at the start, with the game, shifting away from this sandbox PvP into this much more theme park MMO. So I am pleased they're continuing to develop new PvP modes. I still feel like a region further north with rare resources that auto-toggle PvP by entering it would be a good addition, but this is something that I've not seen brought up yet, so maybe that's something we could hope for in the future. So I guess I wanted to end this video with the question of, why am I starting to get so upbeat about New World? Yes, part of it is the actual changes we are now seeing introduced into the game. I also feel like player feedback has actually been taken on board, and many of the main criticisms that we saw of the preview event have started to be addressed. Secondly, the decision to delay the full release until August. This might have first kind of seemed like a strange one to be pleased about, but given the sort of content additions and changes we have had since the delay, I absolutely think it was the right decision. And it kind of goes to show Amazon actually cares about a sort of quality release over just rushing it and getting it pushed out. Finally, I think most importantly, is the speed and size of the development updates we are now starting to see. I think at first when we moved away from the sandbox survival mode, the Amazon dev team sort of had a very hard time shifting into this new theme park MMO mode. Updates were slow, kind of unfocused, the game wasn't quite sure which direction it wanted to go in. But now we are seeing not only regular monthly updates, but also huge updates and changes on a monthly basis, all moving in a much more focused direction. And I think it's this that really gives me the most confidence in the way the game is progressing, because I think any problems that are still around now are being fixed and addressed at a speed that means they're really not going to be problems for long. And if the team can start to develop things at this sort of pace and keep moving in this direction, then I think that's a really good sign for the future of the game. But I am but one guy, so what are your thoughts on this? Are you pleased with the current direction of the game, or are you still a bit sceptical that it's going to be a flop on launch? Either way, let me know in the comments down below. All opinions are valid, so be honest what you think about it. Just because I like it doesn't mean you have to. Anyway, but that's really all I've got time for today. So thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to stay up to date with all the latest New World content. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you all on the next one.